Have you ever wondered whether the numbers they tell us about the economy, growth, and wealth are really real? Have you ever wondered why your everyday life, the rent you have to pay, the grocery bill, does not seem to reflect the triumphant statistics you hear on television? To find an answer, we need to look here. This is Ireland. On paper, a true economic miracle. A country risen from its ashes, becoming the fastest growing economy in Europe. In 2015, something impossible happened in this country. Its economy grew by 26.3% in a single year. Bear in mind that an economy has to grow by 2 or 3% to be considered healthy. China, at the height of its most frenzied boom, barely topped 10%. 26.3% is not growth, it is science fiction. It is such a crazy, blatantly absurd figure that Nobel Prize-winning economist Paul Krugman gave it a sarcastic name, Leprechaun Economics. This impossible number is not just a statistical oddity, it is a crack in the system. A crack that lets us peek behind the curtains of the global economy. And this, we assure you, is not just an Irish story. It is the story of how billions of euros that could fund healthcare and schools in your country legally vanish into the accounts of a few gigantic corporations. It is proof that we must change the way we measure a nation's wealth. Stay with us, and we will show you the trick behind this great illusion. Welcome to Amazing Europe. So, how does an entire nation end up with a leprechaun economy? The answer is not in a formula, but in a scar. To understand it, we must go back in time, to before the miracle became an illusion. Once, not so long ago, Ireland was known as the Celtic Tiger, the jewel of Europe, the model pupil everyone pointed to as an example. It had embraced globalization and the euro, attracting investment with low taxes and registering growth rates that made the whole world envious. It seemed invincible. But beneath the glittering surface, a disease was taking hold. Entry into the euro unleashed a tsunami of cheap money, and Irish banks, flooded with liquidity, found their golden goose, a colossal property bubble. Ireland was addicted to one drug, real estate. Unlike other countries, here the cancer was not public debt, but private debt. The banks had borrowed recklessly to finance the bubble. They had become casinos that wagered everything on a single illusion, namely that house prices would never fall. For years, the music never stopped. What could go wrong? Everything. In 2008, the Lehman Brothers iceberg struck global finance, and the Celtic Tiger suffered a heart attack. The bubble burst with unprecedented violence. Prices collapsed, builders went bankrupt, and banks found themselves buried under toxic debts. They were, for all practical purposes, dead. And here, in a single night of panic, the Irish government made one of the most catastrophic decisions in modern financial history. Instead of letting the banks fail to save the citizens, as Iceland did, it did the exact opposite. It guaranteed all the debts of its banks, not only the savings of the Irish people, but the billions owed to big funds and creditor banks around the world. With a single signature, private debt was surgically implanted onto the body of the state. Speculators' debt became the burden of an entire nation. The result was a national tragedy. The model pupil, the proud Celtic Tiger, became one of the pigs, a humiliated nation forced to ask the Troika for a bailout, and with the bailout came brutal austerity. The Irish found themselves paying with cuts to wages and pensions to save not their country, but irresponsible bankers and foreign creditors. The most painful consequence was the return of a historical ghost, mass emigration. Thousands of young people were once again forced to leave their homeland. How do you climb out of such an abyss? Traumatized and backed into a corner, Ireland made a desperate bet. It decided to double down on the only strategy it knew, taking it to a level no one had dared. It chose to transform itself, body and soul, into the most attractive tax haven in Europe. It traded one vulnerability for an entirely new one, and in doing so, it gave birth to an economy that today, as we will see, defies the laws of reality. And so, to save itself, Ireland placed an all-in bet, doubling down on its old strategy and pushing it to the extreme. But how exactly does this new pact work? How do you build an economy that defies the laws of reality? The answer is not found in factories or ports, but in an invisible world worth trillions of dollars that has changed the rules of the game forever. The beating heart of this new Irish economy is a concept as abstract as it is powerful: intellectual property. We are not talking about physical goods, but ideas. And who are the kings of this invisible realm? The giants of tech and pharmaceuticals, almost all American. Think Apple, Google, Microsoft, Meta, or drug behemoths like Pfizer. Their value does not lie in factories, but in the code that powers your smartphones, the algorithms that run the internet, the chemical formulas that can save lives. This intangible treasure is the true oil of the 21st century, and its most fascinating and dangerous feature is that it can have an address. It can reside legally anywhere. With an act of accounting genius, these companies chose to give their treasures an Irish address. The mechanism that follows is a masterpiece of tax engineering. Imagine this. You, in Italy, Germany, France, or even in some non-European countries, go into a shop and buy a product from one of these mega corporations. The sale happens there, the money changes hands there. Logic would dictate that the profit be taxed there, but that is not what happens. The local subsidiary of the company reports minimal profits, sometimes almost none. How is that possible? Simple. It has to pay a huge sum to the European headquarters, which almost always happens to be in Ireland, in the form of royalties or a license. In practice, it pays to use the brand and the technology that conveniently now live legally in Ireland. It is a global sleight of hand, executed with a single click. Without a single physical euro moving, billions in profits are legally siphoned out of markets around the world and channeled into the accounts of the Irish subsidiary. And there the final magic happens. Instead of being taxed at the 25, 30 or 35% rates common elsewhere, they are taxed at Ireland's 12.5% rate, or often, thanks to even more sophisticated mechanisms, at much lower effective rates. But how can we be so sure that much of all this is just an accounting illusion? That this wealth is, to a large extent, made of paper? For a very simple reason. The Irish themselves tell us. Aware of this enormous distortion, Irish economists and statistical authorities did something almost unique in the world. They created a filter, a special metric to separate reality from fiction. Today, there are two ways to measure the Irish economy. The first is GDP, Gross Domestic Product. This is the official figure, the front page number, that is celebrated everywhere, but it is inflated by all the billions of multinational profits that are just passing through. Then there is the other measure, Modified Gross National Income, a cumbersome name for a simple concept, the real economy. This number takes GDP and subtracts all the profits and accounting distortions that have no concrete connection to Ireland. And when you put the two numbers side by side, the illusion is exposed. In 2023, Ireland's official GDP was around €506 billion. The real economy, by contrast, was only €274 billion. You read that correctly. Nearly half of Ireland's official economy, almost €1 out of every two of that globally celebrated wealth, simply does not exist in people's lives. It is smoke. It is the accounting scar of the 2008 crisis, a miracle built on invisible foundations. And now, let's see what happens when you are forced to live inside a paper miracle. We have just seen how almost half of Ireland's economy exists only on paper. And that brings us to the most important question. What is life really like inside a paper miracle? If you are an ordinary citizen, a nurse, an engineer, a teacher, a bricklayer, what good is a GDP per capita that, on paper, is among the highest on the planet? The answer, for hundreds of thousands of Irish people, is as simple as it is brutal. It's absolutely useless to you. In fact, more often than not, you end up paying the price. Let's start with the most basic thing, a roof over your head. In this supposedly very rich country, finding a place to live has become a nightmare. Ireland is in the midst of one of the most severe housing crises in the Western world. The average rent in Dublin has climbed past €2,300 a month. We are not talking about luxury villas, but ordinary apartments, often small. That puts the Irish capital on par with Paris or Amsterdam, sometimes even higher. The key word is not just expensive, it's unaffordable. At times, across the whole country, there have been fewer than 1,000 homes available to rent, for a nation of over 5 million people. Picture the scene. 50 people queued in the rain to view a one-bedroom flat. That is the reality for many young professionals. The ultimate paradox? You might work for one of the tech giants that inflate the GDP. You might earn a salary that would be considered excellent anywhere else, yet you cannot afford a decent life in the city that produces that wealth. And when the market is so overheated, the darkest consequence appears. At the end of 2023, Ireland recorded its highest ever number of people sleeping rough or in emergency accommodation. More than 13,000 people, including nearly 4,000 children, forced into temporary housing. In one of the richest countries in the world. But the crisis doesn't stop at the front door. Ireland is officially the most expensive country in the entire European Union. According to Eurostat, prices for goods and services are 46% above the EU average. Groceries cost more, energy costs more, transport costs more. The paper wealth of multinationals has created a real economy where the cost of living has become unsustainable for many. And finally, there is the definitive proof, the thing that touches people's health. If a nation is truly wealthy, its public services should be flawless. Yet the Irish health system is perpetually on the brink of collapse. It is sadly infamous for its trolley crisis. Patients, often elderly, left for days in emergency department corridors because there are no beds available. 2023 was the worst year on record. And if you need to see a specialist, get in line. At the end of 2023, over 600,000 people were waiting for a first hospital appointment. Waiting times can last months, sometimes years. This is the real face of Leprechaun Economics. Record-breaking numbers on paper, and record-length queues in real life. Queues for housing, queues at the supermarket, queues at the hospital. A wealth as vast as it is intangible, which has created a two-speed country. One, the glittering world of corporate balance sheets, and the other, the exhausting grind of everyday life. And that brings us to another crucial question. If Ireland suffers like this, who benefits? And why does this system matter to all of us beyond Ireland's borders? We have seen the Irish paradox, but now we must answer the most important question. Why does this country's strategic choice have a direct impact even on those who are not Irish? To understand it, we must talk about an unwritten pact, almost a social contract, between big corporations and every nation in which they operate. Companies use a country's infrastructure, its highways, its internet network, its legal system. They use its workforce, trained in its schools and universities, and above all, they sell their products to its citizens. In return, they pay a share of their profits in taxes, which are used to fund those very things. The Irish model is not just a loophole, it is a direct attack on that fundamental pact. It is the core of a global system economists call BEPS, base erosion and profit shifting, which, in plain terms, is the art of breaking the link between where wealth is created and where taxes are paid. But how, in concrete terms, does this system drain money from other states' coffers? It is not an exaggeration, it is mathematics. Let us imagine it simply. When a multinational legally shifts €100 million of profits from Italy to Ireland, those €100 million vanish from Italy's tax base. The Italian state suddenly loses roughly €24 million in taxes it would otherwise have collected. Now multiply this effect across hundreds of multinationals, year after year. The result is a colossal hole in the public budget, and a government facing a budget gap has only three options, none of which are pleasant for its citizens. Option 1. Cut public spending. Less money means longer hospital waiting lists, more crowded classrooms, less maintenance for roads. Option 2. Raise other taxes. If big companies don't pay their fair share, that tax burden shifts onto citizens through higher income taxes, and onto local small and medium enterprises, the ones that cannot afford an army of tax lawyers. Option 3. Increase public debt. The state borrows the missing money, leaving future generations to pay the bill with interest. This is how the system empties your pockets, either with worse services, or with higher taxes, or with heavier debt for our children. It is not hyperbole, it is the relentless arithmetic of public finance. The OECD estimates that this game costs public coffers worldwide up to $240 billion every year. And the most striking proof that this system reached absurd levels is the Apple scandal. In 2016, the European Commission found that, thanks to a special arrangement with Ireland, Apple paid an effective tax rate of 0.005% on its European profits. You read that right. The Commission then ordered Ireland to recover €13 billion in unpaid taxes. And here is the absurd part. Any country in the world would have celebrated such a windfall. Ireland did not. Ireland appealed to avoid receiving that money. Why? Because it was terrified of breaking the pact with the multinationals. A move that reveals, more than anything else, the nature of a system that has held an entire country hostage, with consequences for all of us. But did the world really just stand by? In fact, it eventually reacted, with a rule that changes the game. But before we reveal it, if you found this video informative, we kindly ask you to support our project with a like, by subscribing to the channel and clicking the bell so you don't miss our new videos. And we also remind you of our new channel, America vs. Europe, where we rank all European countries, the United States and Canada across different factors. The final question comes naturally. Is Ireland the villain in this story? Did it cheat? The answer, as so often happens, is not that simple. In a ruthless global arena, Ireland used the tools it had. It exploited the cracks of an outdated international tax system, one written in the 20th century for an economy of factories and smokestacks, and applied it to today's immaterial world. It didn't break the rules. It simply played the game better than anyone else, turning itself from the sick man of Europe into a tech powerhouse. A tech powerhouse that, however, did not guarantee prosperity for all its citizens. But its story is a warning. It cured the illness of the 2008 crisis, the risk of internal implosion, yet exposed itself to an entirely new vulnerability: external shocks. Today, its official prosperity hangs by a thread that it does not control. A thread pulled by decisions made in Washington or Brussels. Any shift they make can bring the whole structure down. It has become a tiger standing on glass foundations. The world has finally begun to react. More than 140 nations have agreed on a global minimum tax for multinational corporations, a historic attempt to stop this race to the bottom. It is a first step, perhaps the most important in the last 50 years, but the challenge has only just begun. The story of Ireland's phantom economy leaves us with a question that goes far beyond the borders of this island and speaks directly to our future. What does wealth really mean for a nation? Is it the astronomical number that appears on a GDP chart, inflated by the profits of a few global giants? Or is it a society's ability to guarantee its citizens a dignified life, affordable housing, and a healthcare system that works? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. As for our opinion, we believe that as long as we continue to measure the success of our nations with obsolete metrics that ignore people's real lives, we will keep sacrificing genuine stability for superficial prosperity. We will keep celebrating paper miracles while the foundations crumble. And the next time you hear a politician boasting about economic growth, perhaps, thanks to this story, you will ask yourself one more question. If you want to understand the situation not only in Ireland but also in other European nations, we strongly recommend watching this video, where we reveal 5 Eurozone countries that truly came close to bankruptcy in recent years. That's all for this video. See you next time.